When the senators finished their questioning of Martin Kelly, they broke for lunch. The probe of dirty tricks in the Florida primary moved from Miami to Tampa when they resumed. The new witness was Robert Benz, former president of the Young Republican Club in Tampa.
The committee will come to order, and before the next witness is called, I read this memorandum addressed to me by Philip K. Beck, counsel for Martin Douglas Kelly, dated October 4, 1973, at Mr. Beck's request. The morning session was adjourned before I had an opportunity to state on the record my clients and my appreciation for the excellent cooperation of the committee staff counsel, particularly Mr. Terry Lenzer and Mr. Mark Lackritz. They conducted themselves in an exemplary fashion, both professionally and as gentlemen. The committee is fortunate to have men of that caliber assisting them. Please enter this into the record. Respectfully submitted, Philip K. Beck, counsel for Martin Douglas Kelly. And this will be inserted in the record at that point. Counsel will call the next witness.
Mr. Robert Benz.
Mr. Benz, will you stand up and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the evidence that you shall give to the Senate Select Committee on presidential campaign activities shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Terry Lenzner, Assistant Chief Counsel, will question the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Benz, you're accompanied by counsel. Will counsel identify himself, please?
Delbert L. McLaughlin from Tampa, Florida.
And, Mr. Chairman, we may note for the record that Mr. Benz has been granted immunity pursuant to the court order.
Yes, let the record show that as a result of the unanimous request of the committee, Judge John J. Sirico, Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, has entered an order requiring this witness to testify and granting him immunity under sections 6002 and 6005 of Title 18 of the United States Code. And so the testimony of Mr. Benz is given pursuant to this order of immunity, and he is entitled in subsequent proceedings to all of the protections which the order of immunity and the statutes involved place around him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Benz, will you tell the committee your address?
14605 North 43rd Street, Apartment 30, Lutz, Florida.
And how are you employed?
I'm a dock superintendent.
Now, you have had prior political experience, have you not, prior to the presidential election of 1972?
Correct.
And could you briefly describe those experiences? You were I take it you were a manager of a Senate campaign in Florida, is that right?
Correct.
And you were also president of the Young Republican Club down there?
I was.
Now, did you receive a phone call from a man who identified himself as Donald Simmons in November of 1971?
No, sir.
When was that phone call made?
December of 71.
And what did Mr. Simmons say to you?
He was interested to see if I would be interested in being involved in a voter research project.
Is that all he said?
And then he desired a meeting.
And did you meet him?
Yes, sir.
Where was that?
Causeway Inn in Tampa.
And what was your discussion at that time?
He first asked me my past experience in the different campaigns, and he then stated that he would be interested in my becoming involved in an effort to cause disruption in the Democratic primaries.
And did he specify any methods or activities you might engage in for purposes of disruption?
Yes, he did.
Can you explain those?
He was interested for me to obtain hecklers, pickets, and also to get people to infiltrate in the campaigns to gather information.
Now, the records show, and you've told us, that you talked to telephonically Mr. Segretti on a number of occasions, a person you now know, Segretti, and you also met him in person on a number of occasions.
Correct.
And During those discussions, did he further define what your strategy was supposed to be with reference to the specific Democratic candidates in the Florida primary?
Well, the overall strategy was to concentrate on Senator Humphrey, Senator Muskie, and Senator Jackson, and to just generally cause a disruption among these camps.
Were you supposed to concentrate your resources on any particular candidate?
At that time, it was Senator Muskie.
Now, did you receive any money from Mr. Segretti?
Correct.
How much was that?
On what occasion?
First occasion.
$50.
And did you arrange to receive a regular salary from him?
Correct.
How much was that?
$150.
For how long?
We didn't specify the length of time.
Was it a week or a month?
I received that amount on a monthly basis.
And did you also receive expenses?
That is correct.
Did he also tell you that you could he would provide money for infiltrators into the Democratic candidates' campaigns? At
Correct.
some point. Now, after you agreed to work for Segretti, did you approach individuals to recruit them?
Correct.
And who was the first person you approached?
Miss Griffin,
Can you give the committee her first name?
Peg,
What did
Patricia,
you ask her to do?
to join the Muskie camp.
And did she agree to do so?
Yes, she did.
Did you arrange with her to have a story as to why she wanted to join the Muskie camp?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe that?
She stated to the Muskie people that she was a Republican and that she did not care for for the president's policies, and that she was now a backer of Senator Muskie.
And how much money did you pay her per month?
$75.
Now, did you next approach somebody with the first name Debbie?
Yes, I did.
You can't remember her last name.
Correct.
And what did you ask her to do?
To infiltrate one of the campaigns.
Do you remember which one?
It was either Humphrey or Wallace. I don't recall which.
And did she agree?
No.
Now, did there come a time when you did obtain an infiltrator into Senator Jackson's campaign?
Correct.
And who was that?
Miss Froelich.
Can you spell that, please, for the committee?
Probably not correctly.
Well, give it to us as best you can, Mr. Benz.
Frohlich.
And what was her first name?
Esleen. Esleen.
I believe that's Eslene, the last I heard someone spell it.
Did you know her through the Young Republican activities?
That is correct.
Did you pay her $50 a month?
Correct.
Now, did you have a conversation with her about the legality of her activities?
I could have.
Do you remember what you said to her about that?
I don't recall it specifically.
Well, do you remember telling her that you had a lawyer for her if there were any problems?
I remember telling someone that.
You don't remember if it was Miss Froelich?
Correct.
Did you tell a number of people that?
I could have.
Now, did you also recruit an individual by the name of George Herring?
Correct.
H-E-A-R-I-N-G. He's presently in jail, is that correct?
Last I heard.
What did you recruit? And he is in jail on the indictment in Florida on the so-called sexual misconduct letter, is that correct?
No.
What are the charges against him?
For not having their proper identification on a letter.
And that's the letter, is it not?
Correct.
Now, what did you recruit him for?
Field activities.
Now, did Mr. Herring ask you who you represented when you hired him?
He could have. I don't recall.
And you told him that you were doing this on behalf of President Nixon. Do you recall that?
I could have.
You don't recall that now?
I told that to some people. I don't specifically recall if I told that to Mr. Herring or not.
Now, did you also recruit Kip Edwards?
That is correct.
And that was also for so-called field activities?
That is correct.
And Gary Yancey, also for field activities?
Just for one event.
Did you also attempt to get people to infiltrate Governor Wallace's campaign? on occasion?
Yes.
Now, after Ms. Griffin infiltrated Senator Muskie's campaign, what kind of information did she provide you?
Various campaign information, campaign literature, just information on the general campaign strategy.
Did she provide you with stationery from Senator Muskie's campaign?
Yes, she did.
Did she provide you with the names of the campaign staff?
Yes, she did.
Did she also describe their roles?
Correct.
Did she give you an analysis of their weaknesses and strength?
Correct.
Did she also give you the names of the precinct captains for the
She gave me some of the names of the precinct captains.
Did she also provide you with the names of financial contributors?
Some of them.
And did she provide you with schedules of Senator Muskie's travel and meetings with private groups?
She provided, I can specifically recall her providing me with some of Senator Muskie's arrangements.
And did that include meetings with private groups, to your recollection?
I'm sure it was not an extensive report, but I'm sure I can recall her giving me some of that information.
Now, Ms. Froelich, who infiltrated Senator Jackson's campaign, did she also provide similar information?
Yes, sir.
Was that information sent on to anybody?
Correct.
Who did you send it to?
A post office box that I was given.
By?
Mr. Simmons or Mr. Segretti.
Now, the information that you were obtaining, were you also using that information to conduct your so-called field activities?
Correct.
Now, shortly after you agreed to work for Mr. Simmons, did you receive a letter postmarked California instructing you to do something?
It could have been postmarked California.
And do you remember what it asked you or instructed you to do?
Basically, it was a letter requesting that I acquire pickets at any rallies that President Nixon might attend in the area.
And were these rallies supposed to carry signs or appear to come from another candidate's camp?
Correct.
Which candidates were they supposed to represent?
One of the Democratic candidates.
Senator Humphrey, Senator Muskie, or Senator Jackson?
Correct.
Now, did you obtain any tickets to do that?
No, sir, did not.
Now, Senator Muskie appeared in Tampa in January of 1972. Did you conduct any activities with regard to his appearance at that time?
Yes, we did.
Can you describe those to the committee?
We released a press release and sent that to, I believe, the Newsman, and we also acquired 10 pickets that picketed the hotel.
Now, was that press release based on information you received from Ms. Griffin?
That is correct.
And what was that information?
Basically, it was the information that Senator Muskie was using government-owned typewriters provided by a congressman. Also, that federal employees were involved in his campaign and not on a leave of absence.
And Mr. Benz, are you talking about the press release that you sent out?
I'm sorry, I am confused. I'm sorry.
Let me see if I can refresh your recollection. You did send out a press release referring to a reception and private dinner that Senator Muskie was going to have. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you received that information from Ms. Griffin. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what, you sent that out on, I take it, Senator Muskie's stationery?
That is correct.
To the news media?
That is correct.
And what was the result of that effort?
I don't recall a specific result.
Well, wasn't the dinner that had been planned canceled as a result of that?
Yes, sir.
Now, who did you have hire the pickets?
Mr. Herring?
And did they carry signs?
Yes, they did.
And can you describe the nature of those?
There's in reference to Muskie's statement concerning a black vice president would not be acceptable.
And how much were they paid, if you remember?
Maybe $100.
Now, did you instruct Mr. Herring on what they should do if questioned about who they represented?
Correct.
And what were they told?
To state that they represented one of the other Democratic candidates. Senator Jackson or Senator Humphrey?
One of those. Now, did you also learn that Senator Jackson was to appear for the opening of his headquarters in Tampa in January of 1972?
Correct.
And did you take any actions with regard to that?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe those?
Those were the activities where I hired a Mr. Yancey and a Mr. Edwards to sit across the street with some signs, something stating to the fact that believe in Muskie or Muskie country.
And were you on the scene that day?
Yes, I was.
Did you observe Senator Jackson with Mr. Yancey and Mr. Edwards?
Yes, I did.
And was a photograph taken of that?
Yes, there was.
And did you see it reprinted in newspapers?
Yes, I did.
Was that widely circulated to your knowledge throughout the country?
I don't know.
It was in the local area.
Correct.
Did you also observe Mr. Segretti in the area?
Yes, I did.
Now, did there come a time after that incident when you had your field operation conduct a picket at Senator Muskie's train stop in Florida, campaign train stop? Mr. Benz.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Did you have pickets at Senator Muskie's train stop in Florida?
Yes, sir.
Where was that?
In Winter Haven?
And did they carry signs?
Yes, they did.
Can you describe those signs?
Wallace Country.
I'm sorry, Mr. Benz.
Wallace Country.
Who were those pickets?
Mr. Herring, Mr. Edwards, and a gentleman by the name of Duke.
And who was this individual named Duke? Did you know anything about his background?
Mr. Herring had told me that he was a former member of the Nazi Party.
Were you conducting these pickets at Mr. Segretti's direction? And did you do this operation at his direction?
We were in contact.
Well, had he advised you of the train schedule?
Yes, he had.
Did you also discuss the possibility of disrupting Senator Muskie's train schedule by furnishing false information to his headquarters office about his schedule?
Correct.
Did you also obtain pickets at a speech that Senator Muskie gave at the University of Southern Florida?
I don't recall which presidential candidate it was that appeared at University of South Florida. I did obtain pickets that did go out to University of South Florida.
I take it you obtained pickets on a number of occasions for a number of candidates. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you also attend 2 rallies for Governor Wallace?
Yes, I did.
And did you distribute or have distributed literature at one of those rallies?
Yes, I did.
Where was that?
St. Petersburg, Florida.
And I believe that document is tab 18, but I'd like to hand you, if I can, a copy and ask you if that is the document that you were handing out at that rally, or one similar to it.
Yes, it is.
Can you read that, please?
If you like Hitler, you'll just love Wallace.
And what's it say on the other side?
A vote for Wallace is a wasted vote. On March the 14th, cast your ballot for Senator Edmund Muskie.
Now, do you recall how many of those you distributed?
No, sir.
Can you estimate it?
No, sir.
Do you recall having about between 500 and 1,000 of those printed?
There could have been that many.
Could it have been more?
I don't really recall.
Now, did you also receive in the mail posters, which are now, one of which is now in evidence, saying, "Help Muskie, support busing our children"?
Correct.
And did you distribute those?
Yes, I did.
Where did you distribute those?
In the northern section of Florida.
Can you name the cities?
Jacksonville, Daytona, and Orlando.
And did you have Mr. Hearing also distribute those?
Yes, I did.
And where did he put them up?
In Tampa and St. Petersburg, Clearwater area.
Now, you started to, in response to another question, talk about a letter which appeared to come from a former Muskie volunteer.
That is correct.
I believe that if you look at tab 9 of your documents,
That is the, yes, sir.
and did you have that letter prepared?
Yes, sir.
And did you have it typed on that stationery?
Yes, I did.
And that's Senator Muskie's stationery?
That is correct.
And did you have it sent to anybody?
Yes, we did.
Where was it sent?
I believe it was sent to the news medias.
Was it also sent to Senator Jackson's campaign?
Probably was.
Well, if you look on the front of that document, it seems to indicate that the letter was directed to Senator Jackson's campaign and a copy was sent to another office of Senator Jackson. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Now, in March of 1972, did Mr. Segretti indicate to you that something hot was coming in the mail?
Correct.
And did you thereafter receive some items in the mail?
Correct.
And can you describe what those were?
That was the letter concerning the sexual misconduct of Senator Jackson and Humphrey.
And what else was in the package?
Stationery and envelopes.
And was that Senator Muskie's stationery?
That is correct.
What did you do with those materials?
I gave it to Mr. Herring.
And what was he instructed to do with them?
Mail them.
The letter was retyped or on the
The
stationery?
letter had to be duplicated on the stationery.
And who did he mail them to?
As I recall, it was supporters of Senator Jackson.
Where did you get their names and addresses?
From Miss Froelich.
From Ms. Froelich inside the Senator Jackson's campaign.
That is correct.
And that is a letter that you referred to before that Mr. Herring is incarcerated on. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, did Mr. Segretti also give you 3 vials of some chemical substance sometime in March of '72?
That is correct.
What discussion did you have with him at that time?
I can't recall all the conversation, but I do recall him instructing me to place this liquid substance into the headquarters of Senator Muskie, the 2 headquarters in Tampa, and also at the picnic. I don't recall if that was at that particular time or not, though.
Was this shortly before the primary of March 14th?
That is correct.
What did you do with those?
I gave them to Mr. Herring.
And to your knowledge, what did Mr. Herring do with the chemical compounds?
As he told me that he placed those into the headquarters of Senator Muskie.
Into 2 headquarters?
Correct.
How was, they were in 2 different locations?
That is correct.
Was one of the headquarters called the telephone bank?
That is correct.
Were these placed the day before the primary?
Evening.
The evening of the primary. Did Mr. Herring indicate how they gained entrance to those buildings?
They did not gain entrance.
Well, how did they get access to them?
Access to the building?
So they could throw or do whatever they had to do with the chemicals.
Well, in one building, there was a hole in the window which they dropped the substance through. And in another building, as that was told by me, that the screen was open and the window was open and they dropped it in.
They didn't tell you that they removed the screen?
That is correct, as I recall.
Which is correct? That they did remove the screen or they didn't?
As I recall, they pushed the screen was already open.
Now, what did Mr. Herring do with the other chemical?
They took that to a picnic, and it was a Senator Muskie's picnic, and they emptied the vial at the picnic.
Where was that picnic held?
It was on the grounds of a Mary Help of Christian Church school.
And you and Segretti observed that picnic, did you not?
No, we did not.
You were not in the area?
Not at the time of the picnic.
pay Mr. Herring for those activities?
Yes, I did.
How much did you pay him?
Probably $100, something to that effect.
Did you later see any of those incidents published in any newspaper?
Yes, I did.
And did you send Mr. Segretti the clippings?
Yes, I did.
Now, did there come a time when, at Segretti's request, you left the state of Florida?
That is correct.
And where did you go?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And what was the purpose of that trip?
To start the same type of organization that was in Tampa.
And did you contact people for the purpose of that?
Yes, I did.
Now, I take it that was to infiltrate campaigns and possibly disrupt political events?
Correct.
Now, did you also travel to Milwaukee, Wisconsin with Segretti?
Not the complete way with Mr. Segretti.
Well, from Chicago to Milwaukee.
That is correct.
And what did you do when you got to Milwaukee?
We distributed the campaign flyers that had the information concerning the free chicken barbecue.
At whose campaign was that supposed to be at?
Senator Humphrey's.
And I take it that was an event you created?
That is correct.
Now, would you look at tab 14 of your documents? Is that the leaflet that you distributed in Milwaukee?
That is correct.
And that advertises all you can eat for free with beer, wine, or soda.
Correct.
And also advertises the appearance of some individuals. Could you indicate which individuals you indicated were going to appear?
Senator Humphrey, Lauren Green, and Ms. Martin Luther King.
And what areas of the city did you distribute that in?
All the areas of town.
You remember approximately how many you distributed?
No, sir.
Going back to the picnic where the chemical was distributed, you recall telling the Federal Bureau of Investigation agents who interviewed you in May of this year that you drove to the Muskie picnic on a Sunday evening and noticed that the chemical had been distributed.
That is correct.
And so you did go to the picnic area.
I did go to the picnic area. I did not attend the picnic, as you stated before.
Thank you, Mr. Benz. It's very helpful. Now, did you also discuss with Mr. Segretti the possible activities at the demonstration, at the Democratic Convention?
Correct.
In the summer of 1972.
That is correct.
And would you describe that discussion?
He basically mentioned that I possibly might be needed to travel to one of the conventions to join in on some of the demonstrations.
And did he indicate that he would be hiring other individuals for that purpose?
He indicated that he wanted me to inquire to see if I could get some others.
Did he furnish you any money at that time?
I do not recall him furnishing me with any money at that time. In specific, he furnished me with money all during the campaign, and I cannot recall the specific times of which he did.
Now, did you receive any indication from the people you had inside the campaigns as to what results you were achieving through your other activities?
Only in the Muskie campaign.
And what did you learn from that?
Well, the staff themselves were annoyed by what we were doing.
When you indicated your activities to Mr. Segretti, was he pleased by what you told him?
He generally was.
And did he indicate at any time that the people he was working for were also pleased?
He might have.
You don't recall now whether he did or didn't?
Not specifically.
And you had in your possession at one time documents and records relating to the activities you've testified about. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that question, please?
You had materials and records relating to the activities that you did for Segretti. Isn't that true?
At one time, yes.
And what happened to those documents?
I destroyed them.
And when was that, do you recall?
I believe it could have been in the summer of 72, and it could have been in the fall.
And was there any particular reason why you destroyed those documents?
Well, especially when I saw Mr. Segretti's name and picture in the news media, that was the time that I destroyed any remaining information that I did have.
And when were you first contacted by any investigative agency?
I believe that was January of 73 was the FBI, unless you're referring to Senate investigative people.
No, the FBI, January of 1973?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Yes, that's a vote in the Senate. We'll have to temporarily suspend until the members of the committee can go and vote. Sam?
As the senators head for the Senate floor, we're going to pause for a moment. Public television coverage of the Senate Watergate hearings will continue after this pause for station identification.
Unabridged coverage of the hearings is being broadcast as a public service by your local public television station. This is PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service. Washington, NPACT continues its coverage of hearings by the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities. Here again, NPAC correspondent Jim Lehrer.
As we go back to the hearings, Robert Benz is being questioned by Assistant Minority Counsel Howard Liebengood.
The committee will come to order, and counsel will proceed to cross-examine the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Benz, what were you doing when you were first contacted by Mr. Segretti?
I was a part-time student in delivering newspapers for the Tampa Tribune.
And you were going to school where?
University of South Florida.
Did you accept Mr. Segretti's proposition that you engage in certain political activity on your own volition?
Correct.
Did Mr. Segretti make any promises of political favors to you at that time?
No, sir.
Did he at any time make such promises or overtures?
He mentioned that after the election there possibility of some type of job. He never was specific.
He was not specific?
No, sir.
Did Mr. Segretti indicate to you at the time of his initial contact or thereafter who he worked for?
No, sir.
Did you have any contact during the period of time that you were performing activities with Mr. Segretti or in concert with Mr. Segretti? Any contact with the Republican National Committee?
No, sir.
The committee to re-elect the president?
Yes and no.
Would you explain that yes and no answer?
All right. When I was, after we had finished this complete operation, I was working for a candidate running for the State House of Representatives. And during the course that I did come in contact with people locally that were working in behalf of the President Nixon's campaign.
Was this during the period of time that you were engaged in the activities with Mr. Segretti?
No, sir.
During that period of time, from the time that Mr. Segretti first contacted you to the time that you ceased such operations, did you have any contact with any regular Republican organization? To include local campaign organizations?
Not in connection with this, not at all.
Did Mr. Segretti give you any instructions with regard to coordination of your activities with local Republican organizations?
No. Well, Mr. Segretti gave me the explicit instruction not to contact anybody within the Republican Party during my actions.
When did he give you this instruction?
At the first meeting.
Did you follow that instruction?
Yes, I did.
Did you have any contact with a person who you now know to be Howard Hunt, alias Edward Warren?
No, sir.
Did Mr. Segretti ever explain to you, or did you ever ask, or did you ever come into knowledge during the time that you were working for Mr. Segretti as to the source of the money that he was paying you?
No, I never asked that.
How much money did you say he agreed to pay you? $150 a month?
Correct.
And was this figure maintained throughout your performance of work with him?
Approximately.
Was $150 a month enough to sustain you at that time in and of itself?
No, sir.
I take it that money was not your primary motive for engaging in these activities.
That is correct.
What was your primary motive for engaging in these activities?
I think that I could best explain that by stating the question that Mr. Segretti put forward to me at the Causeway Inn when he asked me if I knew the difference between positive campaigning and negative campaigning. And I answered, is negative campaigning, he asked me if I knew what negative campaigning was, and I answered that is it the opposite of positive campaigning, and he said yes. And then I went on to explain some of the little dirty tricks that were pulled on the campaign that I was involved in the 1970 elections. And I also explained to him that many of the principals that were involved in the 1970 elections were now managing the Democratic primary campaigns in Florida. And I also felt that this would be an opportunity for myself to give these people a little bit of the medicine that they have given me in the past.
Was this your, are you saying then that that this was your primary motive for accepting his proposition?
Well, I felt that in the past, in my local area, that basically the Democrats had been almost on an election-type basis always participated in this form of action, and that Republicans, since we were in a minority, we were unable to, we always had to strictly abide by the law. And then I felt that if the Democrats got a little bit of a dose of their own type of activities, and they would be a little bit reluctant to do this to us in the future.
So you were taking the proposition that the two wrongs would make a right?
No, sir.
You engaged several people in several primary campaigns to infiltrate the respective Democratic campaigns. And I understand that you did this at the suggestion of Mr. Segretti.
That is correct.
Were all those infiltrations at his suggestion?
Probably was.
Do you know can you tell the committee the rationale behind the infiltration of a opponent's campaign, or in this case, respective Democratic opponents' campaigns?
I think that in most all of your elections, including probably some of the senators that are sitting on this table here, have always desired information on their opponents, and this was our same desire to gather this information.
And what was your purpose of gathering the information? What was done with the information once it was gathered?
We used it in order to plan our action, to cause as much confusion among the Democrats as possible.
Did you forward all the material procured from the Democratic campaigns to Mr. Segretti?
Yes, sir.
Did you operate on any of this information independently of coordination with Mr. Segretti?
I operated both independently and also in cooperation with Mr. Segretti.
There's been some evidence that you promoted or were asked to promote incidents of heckling and demonstrations. Can you tell the committee what the purpose of that activity might be?
the same. You know, it's just to cause a confusion type of activity among the candidates.
Is it, I noted in the witness summary, and I think Mr. Lenzner alluded to it in his questioning, that there was a recruitment of George Herring to participate in a Muskie train trip project where there was literature passed out. Now, was this literature passed out on the Muskie train?
Are you stating that I
No,
said
I'm
that-
asking whether or not the literature was passed out on the Muskie train.
We didn't pass out any literature at the Muskie train stop. That was Pickett's.
In other words, the information here that literature was passed out in conjunction with the Muskie train trip is not accurate.
That is correct.
Thank you. Now, do you have any knowledge of the fabled Canuck letter?
No, sir, not at all.
Is it safe to say that the bulk of your activity was concentrated in the state of Florida?
The bulk of it, yes, sir.
Your activity in Pennsylvania was limited to what?
Contacting one man that I asked to participate in basically the same as far as acquiring hecklers and pickets, and also to send me any news clippings of any of the actions on part of any of the primary candidates. And in fact, that is just what this person did. All he did whatever was send me was just newspaper clippings.
Did you conduct any activities in the state of Wisconsin other than the receipt of bumper stickers from Mr. Segretti for use in Milwaukee, the delivery of flowers, pizza, and chicken to send to Muskie's hotel room, and the preparation and distribution of the flyers that have been previously testified to?
And also two limousines.
And two limousines? Was that the extent of your activity in Wisconsin primary?
Yes, sir.
Do you feel that any of these activities influenced the outcome of the primaries in Wisconsin?
No, sir.
What about your activities in Florida?
No, sir.
Was the purpose of your activity to influence the outcome of these primaries? Or was that a secondary purpose?
That was probably a primary purpose at the beginning.
You'd indicated earlier that your goal was to create a disruption among the Democratic camps.
That is correct.
Dissent, agitation.
Correct.
Do you recall whether or not this was a primary purpose of your activity?
Well, that probably was the primary purpose of just causing as much confusion among the staff as possible was probably the main primary purpose.
Do you think you succeeded in that purpose?
And one of the candidates, we probably did.
I gleaned from your earlier answer that you were motivated in part by a desire for revenge, that you hoped to, as I understood your answer, to impress upon others who might have been disposed to this activity that by virtue of your actions that this was undesirable activity. Is that what you were telling me?
That's correct.
Now, can you think of any legitimate measures that this committee might consider
Certainly.
to halt this activity?
Certainly.
Would you please give us the benefit of your
I
thinking?
think that start from the beginning. I think it's just prosecuting and protecting Republicans and Democrats equally under the law, and I think your problem is going to be solved. But if you do not take this type of approach, then you're going to continue to have this.
Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Do you believe the fact that somebody did evil yesterday justifies you to do evil today?
No, I don't believe that.
Well, that's what you said. You did this. You said that Democrats had done this. Can you tell me any time in the history of the United States that aides in the White House and the president's personal attorney made money available to people to spread lies and libels on candidates of the opposition party?
I don't know if that's been proven or not, Senator.
I've been engaged in concern with politics a long time, and I've been interested in the political history of the United States. And I challenge you or anybody else to point out a single instance in the history of this nation where money donated to advance the political fortunes of a president was used with the consent of the president's assistants in the White House to spread libels against candidates of the opposition political party.
Question?
Yes. There was a question mark after that.
I think first, Senator, I'd answer that. Could you tell me whenever a president has ever been investigated by the news media and by a committee as much as this one? And second, Senator, I asked, where were you in 1960 when it was accused that election was stolen?
Well, I know
out of Chicago. I mean, we're talking now about a campaign being influenced. And I believe you were a member of the Senate when it was accused that a campaign was stolen, Senator. Where were you then? Where were you in 64 and 68?
I was right here in the United States, and I never heard about any campaign being stolen on the credible testimony of any individual. And this is the first time in the history of the United States that the Senate of the United States, by a unanimous vote, has been so moved by reports of rascality on a national scale that it set up a committee to conduct an investigation. Now, you helped to circulate a report that one candidate for president was guilty of homosexuality, didn't you?
That is correct.
Are you proud of your achievement?
I'm not proud that I felt that I had to do that. No, sir.
You didn't have to do it. Did anybody compel you to do it, did you? Did you?
What people tell me is not the most compelling force involved with me, Senator.
Well, this man Segretti, you had never seen this man Segretti before in your life till he came to you. Did you?
No, sir.
And you did it in his instance because he promised you $150 a month in expenses, didn't you?
Saying because?
I say you did it in his instance because he promised to pay you $150 a month in your expenses.
No, sir.
Well, why'd you take $150 a month in expenses?
I needed to cover the expenses, Senator. I couldn't afford to cover the expenses.
Now, what you did, how long were you working or getting money from Segretti?
What, 5, 6 months maybe?
5 or 6 months. And that 5 or 6 months you spent disseminating libels on people that when you knew them were not true, and in other things to disrupt the campaigns of Democrats merely because they were Democrats. Isn't that so?
Could you repeat
Read him the question.
That 5 or 6 months you spent disseminating libels on people when you knew they were not true, and in other things to disrupt the campaign of Democrats merely because they were Democrats. Isn't that so?
No, sir.
Well, why did you do it?
I believe I stated my answer to that question before. Would you like for me to repeat it?
Well, I asked you if you've ever known of White House aides authorizing the use of campaign funds to spread foul slanders and libels against reputable men seeking political office.
I wouldn't know that the money that I used was White House money.
Now, you say that possibly the senators here on this committee have been engaged in tactics like that.
I wouldn't know, only you'd know that.
You
Senator.
said that we had infiltrated, that possibly we had infiltrated campaign organizations of our opponents.
I said I believe that probably you senators yourselves are, when you run a campaign, that you're always interested in opponent research. And this is one way that maybe you use. This is a way that's probably the most common way used in most campaigns.
You're not testifying that I was sent a spy into the campaign organization of any of my opponents, have you?
Only you would know that, Senator.
Well, I'll tell you, I've never done that. And I've been in politics since 1922. And I've never, in that time, known or heard of things going on, at least in North Carolina, that you say you perpetrated in Florida and Wisconsin. Senator Michael. Wait, one question. You know, don't you know that when you circulated that rumor, that false libel about Senator Jackson and Senator Muskie, that occurred before March 1922?
I beg your pardon, sir? Before March of 1922?
1972. Before the primary in March. The primaries in March, primary in Florida was in March 1972, wasn't it? March of 14.
The letter was circulated.
Yes, yes, it was circulated.
And that became known down there, didn't it? It was references made to it in the paper.
Yes, sir.
And it was, you know, it was reported to the United States District Attorney.
Yes, sir.
And you also know that nothing was done about it by the United States District Attorney that anybody could detect prior to April of this year, more than 14 months after it was done.
I wouldn't know that, Senator.
Well, you do know that Mr. Herring, that you operated, who associated with you in your work, was not, and Mr. Segretti were indicted in federal court in Florida in May, or the last of April or the 1st of May, 1973, for something that the federal authorities there had known about as far back as March 1972.
Some of that was reported in the newspaper, sir. Yes, sir. So I did read that newspaper article.
Yeah. And you know that Mr. Herring pleaded guilty of failing to identify the people that perpetrated this false libel on Senator Jackson and Senator Humphrey.
I know that, yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Well, you speak about enforcing the law. It seems like to me that justice in Florida and the federal courts, as far as were traveling on somewhat leaden feet. And I concur in your one thing you said. I fully concur in, and that is the law ought to be enforced against everybody.
Absolutely correct.
And one of the things that somebody deserves credit for is the fact that there have been 7 men convicted here in the district court for trying to pollute the process by which presidents of the United States nominated and elected, and since then 2 employees of the committee to re-elect the president have pleaded guilty to conspiracy to obstruct justice. And that Mr. Segretti has also pleaded guilty in connection with the matters you and he were interested in, and Mr. Herring has been sent to jail on account of the same thing. Which?
I'd like to continue in the same line of questioning as the chairman, Mr. Benz. As I understand it, the letter concerning or alleging sexual improprieties on the parts of Senators Jackson and Humphrey, which letter was totally false, was drafted by Mr. Segretti turned over to you. Is that correct?
It's correct that it was turned over to me, yes, sir.
All right, then what did you do with it?
I gave that information to Mr. Herring. The packet. There was other material with the letter also, Senator.
And you were the one that had hired Mr. Herring in the first instance?
Earlier in the campaign, yes, sir.
So you'd hired Mr. Herring, and you turned that letter over to Mr. Herring.
That is correct.
And as I understand it, Mr. Herring is serving a jail sentence right now on the basis of having distributed that letter?
That is correct.
Did you at any time appear on behalf of Mr. Herring and indicate that, in fact, he was operating on your orders?
Only in grand juries I have, and speaking with the FBI I have, and also speaking with your committee staff I have stated that fact.
Well, I don't understand why it is that Mr. Herring is in jail insofar as this letter is concerned. How is it, in other words, that you seem to have gone completely free in this matter, and actually you were the one that gave the orders on the letter? I'm a little bit confused on that.
He was called before the grand jury on several occasions and took the Fifth Amendment. The next time he was called before the grand jury, he was granted immunity from prosecution and required to testify or go to jail for contempt. He was advised by other legal counsel than myself to go ahead and present testimony. He did so. He has been granted immunity from prosecution by the grand jury, and the grand jury that had that information is the one that indicted Mr. Segretti and Mr. Herring. Is that satisfactory?
Then am I correct in assuming that Mr. Benz was a witness against Mr. Herring? Is that correct?
No, sir. Mr. Benz was not a witness against Mr. Herring because Mr. Herring did plead guilty and there was no trial.
You refer to activities in 1970 which formed the basis of your participation in the events which have been alleged to you. Did you ever lodge a complaint with law enforcement authorities in 1970?
I reported everything to my superiors in the campaign. I don't know what action they took on that, Senator.
But then how is it possible to go ahead and blame the justice system in Florida for what, according to you, didn't happen?
I beg your pardon?
As I understand it, the basis, the motivating factor of Mr. Benz's activities in the 1972 campaign were the fact that similar matters had been done to him in 1970 and apparently no action was taken. I have asked him to specifically list those activities. I'm asking that now. And also I asked the question as to whether or not he filed a complaint with the appropriate law enforcement agencies, which agencies, according to Mr. Benz, did nothing.
He stated he was not sure. He turned the information over to his superiors, and he is not sure whether they filed police complaints or not. I don't know even.
Well, were your superiors Republicans?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm very confused as to how we're going to blame. I mean, there are a lot of things we can blame the Democrats for, but I don't quite understand how we're going to blame the Democrats in your situation in 1970 or the law enforcement officials in Florida. I mean, how does that form the basis for getting riled and trying to do the same thing to the Democrats in 1972? Can you explain that to me?
Do you want specific, Senator, of the actions that were done? Is this your question, or?
Yeah, it's a question. I want to know from you. You say that on the basis of your experiences in 1970, you felt the time had come to the turnabout was fair play and that you were going to give it to the Democrats. Now, you've told me that the dirty tricks that were apparently played on you reported to Republicans. You've also told me you did not report it to any law enforcement agencies. How can you blame, then, these matters on either the law enforcement agencies in Florida or the Democrats? I mean, doesn't the fault then lie with your own party in failing to pursue the information which you gave to them?
In many cases, the information was almost a public knowledge, Senator.
Well, that may be, but somebody that has to go ahead and file a complaint. Somebody has to give information. Did you do that?
It was not my place to do that, Senator. It would have been one of my superiors' position to do that. I do not know if they did that or not. They might have, Senator.
Well, then, in other words, it was the Republicans in your organization, your Republican superiors that dropped the ball. Is that correct?
I do not know if they dropped the ball or not, Senator.
Well, obviously, if they had gone ahead and lodged a formal complaint with law enforcement agencies, you would have had to testify in those matters, and apparently you never did.
Usually it's dropped before it gets that far, Senator.
I suggest to you that you were given every opportunity to go ahead and go the legal route in 1970 on the matters that you complain about, and that they really don't form a valid basis for your motivation in 72.
In my mind, they do, Senator.
But on the basis of fact, they don't.
Your facts or mine, Senator?
Your facts.
On my facts, they do, sir.
Well, then you tell me how.
I believe I have answered that
You
question.
have not answered that. I repeat what I said to you earlier. I ask you what I had asked earlier. Did you report these matters to the appropriate law enforcement agencies?
I reported those matters to my appropriate superiors.
Who were Republicans?
That is correct.
So that in no wise were the Democrats involved in failing to prosecute these abuses.
Not in failing to prosecute, just in committing the act, Senator.
I believe in the staff interview on questioning for Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong stated in any prior campaigns that you had worked, were you aware of any attempts to plant demonstrators or hecklers? Mr. Benz, sure. Mr. Armstrong, what were those? Mr. Benz, well, I know when I was working for Kramer, we had all sorts of stuff done against us by the Democrats. Mr. Armstrong, how'd you know it was being done by the Democrats? Mr. Benz, there's no proof. So, in other words, there are no facts to substantiate the theory which you've put forth to this committee to justify your own actions.
I believe, Senator, that if this committee would investigate campaigns such as the one that they have just investigated, they're going to find the same similar acts as hard as this committee has.
In other words, you belong to the school that everybody has been doing it, and this particular campaign wasn't unusual at all.
That seems to be the general opinion, with the exception of politicians, Senator.
And that this is exactly the way, at least insofar as your experience is concerned, let me put it this way, the placing of let me just read what you were involved with here. Placing informers in the Tampa headquarters of Senator Muskie, Senator Jackson, the releasing to the press of a scheduled fundraising dinner, anti-Muskie pickets calling him a bigot, fictitious letter alleging the illegal use by Muskie of government-owned typewriters of Congressman Gibbons of Florida, the picketing of Muskie's appearance with signs, if you like Hitler, you'll love Wallace, vote Muskie, the supervising, the reprinting and distribution of the scurrilous letter about Senators Humphrey and Jackson, and the placing of stink bombs at Muskie's picnic and Muskie's headquarters. These are all the norm in Florida politics. Is that correct?
Maybe not those specific acts, Senator.
Well, are there acts that are the acts that you're discussing now either worse or the same? And if so, I'd like to hear what they are. I'd like to know of your experience, in other words, in these matters.
All right. Would you like, 1970 was just one particular example. Of course, there were others, but if you'd like, I'd give you the complete rundown on the 1970 dirty tricks.
I certainly would, and I would also hope that these matters have been turned over to the appropriate law enforcement agencies in Florida.
They've been given over to the FBI, Senator.
All right. Given over to the FBI when? At the time they occurred, or at the time this investigation started?
I think we've covered that before, Senator, that again I stated that I felt that it was not my place to give that information over to the officials. I did give that to my superiors, which I felt was my duty. And as I said, I do not know whether they did turn it over to the officials or not.
Yeah, but you just said you gave it to the FBI. When did you give it? When did you turn these matters over to the FBI?
About a year ago.
At the time you were being investigated relative to the 1972 campaign?
Correct.
Well, that's a little late, isn't it? Why didn't you go to the FBI before that?
And again, I think I've answered that before, Senator, about 5 times.
Now, then my last question in this round is that what are your opinions of what you did? This is proper campaigning?
No, sir.
Well, what's brought about a change of mind?
I've always felt this was improper campaign techniques.
I mean, you knew it was improper when you did it, but you did it anyway.
Correct.
Well, I have no further questions on this round, Mr. Chairman.
Down, Mitch.
Mr. Benz, do you have any regrets about your activities in that campaign?
Yes, sir, sure.
You're not proud of what you did then?
No, sir.
You are contrite?
Correct.
Do you have any regrets that one of your subordinates, Mr. Herring, serves 1 year in jail at the present time and you're walking the streets free?
Yes, sir.
It makes you feel that you're quite lucky to be free at the present time, does it not?
Correct.
When did you start feeling regretful about your activity in that campaign?
From the beginning.
When?
From the beginning, when Mr. Segretti approached me at the Causeway Inn.
Did you feel regretful enough at that time to inform the FBI about your activities?
No, sir.
Did you feel regretful enough to inform any other law enforcement officers?
No, sir.
Were you ever instructed not to speak to any of the law enforcement officers?
Just the opposite, sir.
Who informed you to speak the opposite?
Mr. Segretti.
Did you go to the law enforcement officers at that time and speak the opposite?
No, sir.
Why did you remain silent?
I remained silent until they questioned me, and I cooperated with them, sir.
Now, I believe you had 2 subordinates. One was named Mr. Duke, and the other one named Mr. Herring. Is that right? One was referred to
His nickname was Duke. I do not believe that is his last name. And
one was named Duke, and the other Herring.
Correct.
Did Mr. Herring tell you that this man Duke was a former SS officer for Adolf Hitler's stormtroopers?
Correct.
Did you believe that?
No, sir.
Did Duke ever tell you that?
I don't recall if he ever did or not.
Did you feel that being trained by Adolf Hitler and his stormtroopers particularly qualified him for the duties that you assigned him?
I don't know of any training school that would train them for this work.
I couldn't hear you reply.
Said I don't know of any training school that would train a person for this type of work.
Weren't the activities quite similar? Didn't Hitler's Nazi stormtroopers perform similar activities to what you engaged in Florida?
I wouldn't know that, Senator.
You've read some history of that period, have you?
Correct.
not? You've read Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, I take it.
Correct.
Weren't the activities of the Nazi stormtroopers somewhat similar?
I don't see the similarity, Senator.
I thought there were. I read about a good many falsified documents during that era, libels and slander about the opposition. It was one of the ways, as I recall, that Adolf Hitler achieved power. You think Duke carried on his activities in an exemplary fashion in that manner, do you?
Yes, sir.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Inouye.
Most of the questions have been asked, Mr. Chairman, but Mr. Benz, I would like to have your thoughts as to whether the following activities are legal or moral or ethical. The distribution of misleading literature without the source being identified.
That covers all. It is not, Senator.
Sending fake invitations to non-existent events.
It's probably not, sir.
It's not legal.
Sending invitations? Well, I guess it would depend upon whether there was any name identification, Senator.
No, sending out invitations to events, non-existing events, such as the ones you sent out.
What?
Was that?
If there's no name identification on it, then it would be illegal. I do not have the information if there would be a name identification on it, whether that would break the law or not.
Even if it's legal, do you think it's moral or ethical?
No, sir.
What about issuing fake press releases?
Right, correct.
It's okay?
No, sir, I'm sorry. It's not.
How about circulating false, salacious, libelous, and untrue letters designed to injure the candidate of the opposition party?
No, sir.
That's not legal?
No, sir.
What about breaking and entering by forcibly opening a window to place a stink bomb in the headquarters of the opposition party?
No, sir.
What about stink bombs themselves?
I don't know whether that's illegal or not, Senator.
You think it's a good thing in a political campaign?
No, sir.
How about defiling a phone bank?
No, sir.
How did you carry this out, sir? I believe you were involved in the defiling of a phone bank. Could you describe to us what happened?
I think we've already covered when I received the material. Do you want to go on from there?
Yes, please.
I gave the material to Mr. Herring with instructions to place in this material into the downtown headquarters, which was the phone bank and also the Muskie headquarters. And he later told me that he did, in fact, there was a hole in the window of the telephone bank which they placed the substance through. And then in the campaign headquarters itself, there was an open window, and that there was a screen that I believe was loose, and then they dropped it in there, which would be the utility room.
Do you consider ordering supplies, food, beverages on behalf of an opposition candidate with no intention of payment legal, ethical, or moral?
No, sir.
Prior to Watergate and prior to the exposure of your involvement in these sabotage activities, did you consider that the monies spent for furthering your sabotage activities, monies well spent in the effort to re-elect the president?
I really wouldn't know the answer to that, Senator. I'll
ask another one then. Was the re-election of the president so important that any means would have justified that end?
No, sir.
Are you, in your discussion with one of my colleagues here, suggesting that since the other party carried out dirty tricks, your party was entitled to do the same?
My belief at the time, sir, would be that if there was some action in answer to that, to the other party's actions, that in the end that they would pause a minute before they would. That I was hoping that this would be a deterrent to further actions of this type.
Thank you very much, sir.
Senator Weicker. You went up to Wisconsin. How long did you work in Wisconsin?
About 3 or 4 days, Senator.
You had no grievance against the people of Wisconsin, did you? The Democrats of Wisconsin.
He had no grievances against the people.
No, Senator.
Mm-hmm. But you played dirty tricks up there on them.
Yes, sir.
You know. You mean to tell me that you sincerely believe that you were justified in disseminating false and scurrilous attacks upon the characters of Senator Jackson and Senator Humphrey because some Florida Democrats may have perpetrated some instance of which you disapproved upon Congressman Kramer?
I was not justified, Senator, but I was prompted.
Well, Cain was prompted to kill his brother Abel. But so far as I know, he didn't offer much justification. That's anything else.
Mr. Benz, we've checked our records and checked the special prosecutor's office, and there's no indication that, with regard to the conversations you had with the FBI agents, that you made any reference to any allegation involving Democratic misbehavior. Do you want to, does that refresh your recollection that, in fact, when you talked to the FBI, you did not indicate to them any such allegations?
No, sir. Not all the time that they did take down the information. I don't know if this was one of the times where the FBI did not write this information down. They took this by handwritten notes.
And
we talked for some 40 hours, Senator. Excuse me. We talked for some 40 hours, and I do not, no knowledge of what they did write down and what they did not.
And the two incidents that you related to us in response to our inquiry as to what information you had about other incidents in prior campaigns, you indicated one was a poster that said, quote, "Join the Ask You Kramer Club," and one time you said that somebody came in posing as a radio reporter to interview you. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Those are the two instances you gave us.
Those were two of the instances, yes, sir.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Montoya was in the telephone booth a moment ago. So
I'm ready now, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you may proceed.
Mr. Benz, you've made a lot by way of motivation of the existence of dirty tricks during the 1970 campaign. And you have failed to produce any evidence or specific instances of dirty tricks. But I want to ask you this question. Assuming that there were instances of dirty tricks during any Democratic campaign in Florida in 1970, do you feel that this justifies you in maligning or vilifying honorable men who are seeking the presidency of the United States?
Not completely, Senator, but if somehow that my actions, if it helps to clean up the system of politics, then I think it could be justifiable.
Now, assuming that you have similar feelings about murder being committed by individuals, would you attempt to commit murder in order to justify or clean up such conditions?
No, sir.
All right. Doesn't the same analogy apply? Well, does it?
I called his attorney today, and he hasn't called me back.
I think we're talking about oranges and apples, Senator.
Well, I don't think so. I think we're talking about human beings. And we're talking about the dignity of human beings. We're talking about the free electoral process. We're talking about the American people who deserve the truth in political campaigns. Now, don't you think that they deserve some consideration?
100%.
Why didn't you give them that consideration?
I felt that I was, sir.
You felt that you were giving them that consideration by spreading lies about Senator Jackson and Senator Muskie?
I believe I've given my testimony as to what my justification was, Senator.
Is that what you call giving consideration to a free people under a free electoral process under our constitutional system?
I think I've answered that question, Senator.
No, you haven't.
Want me to repeat it?
Yes.
I feel that if my actions in any way would have cleaned up the political system, and then I think that I've attributed something, Senator.
What makes you think that you would be the great American vehicle for purity in politics after what you did?
I don't think I would be a great American vehicle, but if I did play some small role that would help out in that area, Senator.
Well, do you feel that your role has been small?
Yes, sir.
Do you feel it has been great?
No, sir, I believe it's been small.
In what way? Now, explain yourself.
I just do not see the importance of my activities, Senator.
Well, just explain how small your role has been and what you have contributed to purify politics in America.
If my actions in any way would cause a deterrent to actions of this type, then I believe that in a small way it would attribute.
Now, do you encourage the participation of young people in a similar role such as you performed with respect to our election campaigns in the United States?
No, sir, I discourage that.
Well, therefore, you are telling me that since you do not recommend that, it's not a very desirable role for anyone.
That is correct.
Now let us go into how you hired Miss Patricia Griffin. Where was she from?
Tampa.
Was she a lifelong resident of Tampa?
No, sir.
Was she from South Carolina?
I believe she was, sir.
Did she know Harry Dent?
I never saw, I wouldn't know that, sir.
Did she ever speak to you about Harry Dent?
Yes, sir.
She did. In what vein?
I believe that she had known him in South Carolina politics.
Oh, yes. And did she indicate to you how recently, after you talked to her for the first time in Tampa, she had seen Harry Dent?
I don't recall today, sir.
What conversation did you have with her with respect to Harry Dent?
I think we've covered pretty much as what I would recall of the conversation, Senator.
Well, did you know at the time who Harry Dent was?
Yes, sir.
Who was he?
I believe he was a White House counsel.
How long has she been in Tampa at the time that you communicated with and hired her?
I don't recall, Senator, how long she'd been in Tampa.
What particular justification did you present to her in hiring her and in offering her $75 a month?
It'd be in behalf of President Nixon's reelection.
Was she working full-time at the Muskie headquarters?
Not at that time that I approached her.
Did she at any time?
Yes, sir.
And do you know whether or not she was being paid by anyone else to work in there?
No,
and
sir.
Supplementing her income of $75 a month?
All that I know of is the $75 a month that I gave her.
What about Miss Esseline Froelich? What did you tell her by way of justification for hiring her?
Probably the same thing, Senator.
And how long did she work in the Jackson campaign?
A few months, I would assume, Senator.
And she was being paid $50 a month?
That is correct.
Was she a volunteer in the Jackson campaign?
That is correct.
Now, is it your feeling that in view of what you have done, that you have let go of your dignity and decency as an individual?
No, sir.
Have you done anything to restore it since you performed these acts in the political campaign?
I didn't know that I'd lost it, Senator.
You feel that you have not?
That is correct.
You feel that you've done the proper thing?
I felt like I did what I should do.
And as you look back in retrospect, you still say that you did the right thing?
Not the right thing, Senator.
Or the proper thing?
It was not the proper thing. It was the thing that I felt that I should do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Weichel. Do you think that Congressman Kramer lost the 1970 election because of Democratic dirty tricks?
No, sir.
Do you think he lost the election because of a bad split in the Republican Party in Florida?
That probably attributed to the loss, Senator.
What attributed to the loss?
Excuse me?
The split in the Republican Party.
I believe that was one of the factors, Senator.
Not Democratic dirty tricks.
I think that there were, I believe that Democratic dirty tricks was in the area of that split.
But do you think they were responsible for his loss?
Not completely, Senator.
Well, which is it? You initially said no, and now you say not completely.
I believe that the split between Republican politics during 1970 was an attributing factor. I also believe that the dirty tricks was a contributing factor to the split.
All right, now, let me just ask you one last question. While you were doing these things which you've testified to, did you enjoy doing them at that time?
Some of them I did. Some of them I thought was humorous.
Would it be improper for me to suggest then that the reason for doing these things was the fact that you enjoyed doing them rather than
No, sir.
any
No, sir. No, sir.
Higher motive that would relate to the Republican Party?
No, sir.
I still fail to find any reason based in 1970 on your actions or on the fact situation of that time to go ahead and have that as your justification. And very frankly, I think I know the Republicans of Florida fairly well, and certainly the senator that sits with me on this committee. He certainly doesn't subscribe to what you throw out here, and certainly the people that I know in Florida wouldn't either. I've got no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Senator Baker. Mr. Chairman, I apologize to you and to the committee that other Senate business has required me to be in other committees today, and I haven't had a chance to follow the testimony of this witness. And rather than prolong the proceedings by trying to pick up to speed on what's already been asked and run the risk of repetition, I'll forego my opportunity to question the witness.
I have one last question I'd like to ask him. Is it fair to infer from your testimony that you believe that the way to clean up politics is to make it more filthy?
No, sir. I believe I stated before the way that I felt would be the proper start, Senator.
Well, I just didn't know whether it's fair to infer that from your testimony or not, and I wanted to have a view whether it was. I have the committee was. Do you have anything further you want to say?
No, sir.
The committee will stand in recess till Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock.
And with that, the committee recessed for a long weekend to pick up its dirty tricks investigation again on Tuesday. Perspective on dirty tricks is always difficult to come by, particularly in terms of how much effect they have on the outcome of any given election. Well, Peter Kay discussed that with Jules Witcover of the Washington Post after the session was over this afternoon. Witcover covers politics for the Post and is the author of several books on various political campaigns and candidates, including one each on Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew.
Jules, in the testimony both yesterday and today, the committee seemed to be trying to find out whether these dirty tricks were aimed more at getting votes for a certain opposition candidate or with disrupting the campaigns of the various Democrats. Now, you've been listening to the Watergate Committee. You traveled around with candidates a lot. What's been your experience?
Well, it's hard to say whether the dirty tricks ever got anybody any votes. They're so amateurish most of the time that the main function, I think, has been to create dissension in the opposition camp. It's and even then, I wouldn't think that, with the exception of maybe the New Hampshire primary last year, any primary was affected in a critical way by a dirty trick.
Most of what we heard seemed to be directed at Senator Muskie. Do you happen to know how Senator Muskie has reacted to these various revelations?
Well, he certainly feels that I've talked to him fairly recently about it. He believes, for instance, that the Canuck letter, the letter in which he was accused of making a slur against French-Canadian Americans in New Hampshire, was an important factor in what happened to his campaign thereafter. Not particularly that letter, but it was, I mean, not the contents of the letter, but the letter did lead him to make that emotional display in New Hampshire, which many people said, in which many people said he cried. He insists still that he never did cry. But whether he did or didn't, he admits that the impact of that episode on the press, on the way he was perceived by the press and treated by the press, on his own campaign, on morale within his own campaign, was very, very destructive. And so in that particular case, he feels very strongly that his campaign went downhill after that.
Well, then it isn't just the candidate himself, but it's the morale of his staff, it's the image the press has of him, it's a lot of factors that are affected.
I think when we try to assess the impact of anything on a campaign, we do it too narrowly. We do tend to think of it in terms of votes. But a campaign is a mix of candidates' appearances, candidates' psychology, the way he thinks about what's going on in the campaign, how the press perceives him, and very often, whether the press's perception is correct or not, it's a factor, an important factor in the campaign, because perception and reality are things that get mixed up in a campaign, and what the viewer at home watching on television or the reader of the newspaper sees in a campaign is really perception. The reporter tries to make it reality as much as he can, but very often it's not that.
In the testimony on this dirty tricks phase we've heard the last day or two, there's been an attempt again by the committee to try to tie these activities out in the field very strongly to the White House through Dwight Chapin and others. Now, you wrote sort of a definitive book in 1968 on the Nixon candidacy. Was there an escalation of this in 1972 over 1968?
Well, I think what the escalation was, Peter, is that the resources were greater and the determination to leave no stone unturned was greater. And so there was an overkill in the use of money, in the use of people, in finding things to do. And I think that those excesses were demonstrated in things like dirty tricks.
Finally, Jules, quickly put on your Agnew hat as an Agnew biographer and assess the Agnew situation in terms of Watergate. What has Agnew done to the Watergate hearings, and what has it done to the president?
I wouldn't think it's done much to the Watergate hearings. I share the view that the Watergate hearings are going downhill anyway, that the most dynamic and explosive elements were already taken up by the committee. As far as what it does to the administration, I think it puts the president in still another crisis of leadership. He has not been able to side with his own attorney general, and he has not been able to side with his vice president. And I think it makes him look very weak.
And the vice president, you've observed him for a long time.
I think he's fighting with his back against the wall. I think he's doing what he feels is the only thing he can do. I'm kind of surprised and a little amused that he has chosen to almost exonerate the press on the matter of leaks, and I think, and blaming others instead of attacking the press as we've come to know him to do. I think the reason clearly is that he needs friends.
Jules, thanks very much for a marvelous rundown.
Thank you.
These committee hearings have been the subject of controversy since before they began in May. The newest debate revolves around whether or not what they're up to now is dull or exciting in showbiz terms, relevant or a waste of time as far as new information is concerned. Peter Kay has some thoughts about this current state of affairs.
On this 42nd day of hearings, the Watergate Committee finds itself in a unique and uncomfortable position. For the first time today, there was no live television coverage. The press tables were half filled, and even the lineup of people waiting to get in was way smaller than it's been. Among senators themselves, interest seems to have been diminished. Only 5 senators were present when the hearing started, 20 minutes late. Part of this apparent apathy can be explained by the absence of star quality in today's 2 witnesses, Robert Benz and Douglas Kelly. But the committee faces a more fundamental problem. The dirty tricks phase of the investigation just hasn't caught on. Now, maybe it's because last summer's hearings were a tough act to follow. Perhaps the public is tiring of Watergate. Or maybe people believe that dirty tricks are a natural part of campaigning, natural though regrettable, and that 1972 really produced nothing new. Assistant Committee Counsel Terry Lenzner says he may yet have a few surprises in the dirty tricks phase. So might the Republican minority, but don't count on it. As for the final or campaign financing phase, Assistant Committee Counsel Dave Dorson says it will be interesting, informative, important, but hardly sensational. The committee's quandary is further complicated by another factor, the possibility that the Senate may recess from October 12th to 29th. Now, this would leave the committee with one of 3 rather unpleasant alternatives. Either it would have to cut the hearings short, extend them beyond the proposed November 1st deadline, or keep working while other senators are recessing. Who would have thought last summer that the committee's winter of discontent would start so early? Jim?
All right, and we'll be back on Tuesday when the committee's winter of discontent or otherwise continues. Until then, for Peter Kay and Impact, I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.
From Washington, you've been watching gavel-to-gavel videotape coverage of the hearings by the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities. This program was made possible by grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation. This has been a production of NPACT, a division of the Greater Washington Educational Telecommunications Association.